I am also very concerned about the situation, particularly in northern Syria along the border to Turkey, because what we've really seen is since the Turkish Peace Spring operation that began in October 2019, really a continuation of different types of aggression and clashes by Turkish forces as well as the Syrian National Army in the areas that they now control, despite a ceasefire agreement. So the United States negotiated a ceasefire agreement back in October 2019 with Vice President Pence at the time. And in an analysis that I did of open source ACLA data, there were over 800 Turkish violations of the ceasefire agreement in just the first year after that agreement was signed. And so Turkey has really disregarded the ceasefire agreement and just proceeded with their actions in the north, and even actually expanded some of the areas that they control. So the area that Turkey controlled back in October 2019 was supposed to be between Tel Abyad and Ras Al Ain or Serikani in Kurdish, but they've actually expanded even a little bit farther to the east in violation of the agreement. And so really what we see is kind of an ongoing, at low intensity, but it's an ongoing issue that there are clashes between the Syrian Democratic Forces as well as the SNA, or the Syrian National Army, backed by Turkey, because Turkey has not only used these militias within the SNA to expand the territory that they control, but also they have captured some members of the Syrian Democratic Forces inside Syria that were defending their villages, which they were allowed to do. Also, according to the ceasefire agreement, they're allowed to defend this region. They were captured, members of the SDF, inside Syria, brought to Turkey, tried in Turkish courts, and sentenced to prison in Turkish prisons. And so this is a clear violation of international law, and it is something that I hope personally will be raised with the Biden administration, because it's clearly in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, to which Turkey has been a party since the 1950s. So there's one particular woman named Çiçek Kobane. She was sentenced to life in prison. And others have received other sentences, but this is something that I think is one issue that is very concerning. And it's also a bit ironic if you think about it, because on the one hand, Turkey's whole motivation for doing this has been to say they want to deport the Syrian refugees that are now in Turkey back to Syria. But then at the same time, they're taking Syrians from Syria and bringing them to Turkey and putting them in jail. So I published an article just 2 days ago, actually, arguing that if we look at, as researchers, if we look at cross-national research, so not just focused on Syria, but actually research that's been done all around the world in terms of what is the best way to resolve conflicts. Mm-hmm. And that research on conflict resolution shows that including women in peace negotiations is associated with improved outcomes. Mm-hmm. And including women in the civilian government and as well as the security forces is also associated with improved national security outcomes. Mm-hmm. And so the northeast part of Syria has the highest levels of women's representation, both in the military and security, the SDF and the Asayish, the police forces, as well as in the civilian administration, compared to the other parts of Syria. Mm-hmm. And yet, it is that part of Syria that is excluded from the peace talks in Geneva. And this is, unacceptable, I think, because it flies in the face of decades of research that shows that including women is important. And it also flies in the face and it contradicts the UN's own resolutions. I mean, it contradicts the UN's resolution on women, peace, and security, which 20 years ago, they decided that there should be a mandate to increase the number of women in peacekeeping operations, UN peacekeeping operations. They wanted women to consist of at least 20% of UN peacekeeping operations. That was the UN goal, 20%. But by 2015, only 3% of UN military peacekeepers were women. And only 20% of UN police personnel were women. But in the SDF, you have 30%. My personal opinion is that they need to restructure the way these talks have been happening, because the UN envoy Geir Peterson has said clearly they have utterly failed. They have made no change on the ground in Syria, and they've made no real vision for the future either. And so he himself, the UN Special Envoy to Syria, has called for rethinking the way these talks are happening. And so I do hope that the Biden administration will support including the autonomous administration in those peace talks in order for them to be successful. I think that the autonomous administration has said that they are willing to talk. They have been talking to Assad, and they are willing also to talk to Turkey. And so they've made clear that they want to be open to negotiations with all various sides. And expanding the negotiations in Geneva, I think, would be an important way to move forward. I think that we've actually known for several years that Turkey's priorities in Syria have been to prevent the creation of this semi-autonomous region in the north, which I believe it perceives more as politically a threat than an actual security threat to Turkey, because it sees any semi-autonomous region where Kurds, for example, have more rights, that could inspire Kurds inside Turkey. And so it's always, I think Turkey has always seen this region more as a quote-unquote political threat than an actual real military or security threat to Turkey. But it has behaved as if it was an existential security threat to Turkey. And that's what the rhetoric we hear from Erdogan, at least for the past few years. And because of this, that has been their priority, and not really the fight against ISIS. I mean, there was back in 2017, Turkey was more active, I think, in ISIS than recently. Perhaps this will change. It's not clear yet what will happen with the ISIS sleeper cells in Syria if they become, if they reactivate and become more active. If Turkey will begin to then also take a more active role against ISIS, will be, an interesting thing to watch and keep an eye on.